Hey, good afternoon to you. I just wanted to get into a few odds and ends. And more specifically, I wanted to talk about your sentence and paragraph level writing for this particular class. If you have received your book and you can go to chapter 17, that chapter talks about style and technical writing, which is actually very, very important. Style is not only what you write, but how you write it and how you express it. And what you need to be aware of for this particular class is that your writing is business writing, professional writing. It's writing that has to be completed typically for work. And so, what you need to be careful of, not only in terms of sentences or in paragraphs, is clear writing, but also you want writing that can be understood in all parts of the country, and also too, if you work for a multinational sort of company, that it's understood all around the world. Because, for example, here in southwestern Pennsylvania, we use quite a bit of slang. We use chopped ham, yuns, crick, pop, tuna fish is one that we use, shopping buggy, jumbo, hoagie. There's a number of them. My grandmother used to use the one called gum boots for rubber boots that people use in the summertime. So you have to stay away from that. And you also have to be aware of, in terms of language, that you don't want to use cliches. And cliches are, pedal to the metal, or it's hot as hell in here. That is informal language that you really have to be careful of. And you also have to be aware of is what's called colloquial or informal language. So it would be okay if I'm talking to a group of people and said, I was so sick over the weekend that I was sweating out a cold. And that's what you call colloquial or informal language. Or I'm just kicking back today, or I'm just taking it easy, or I'm catching 40 winks, or I'm taking a snooze. Like I said, slang, but also sort of this colloquial, informal language may not be understood. And the other thing in this particular, in the United States also, we use what are termed idioms. So sometimes people say, I'm surfing the net, or phrases like that that may not be understood in other countries. So try to keep your language more neutral and clearer, and use simple terms. I mean, I think that really helps. But in chapter 17, starting on page 588, they talk about the definition of style, and you can pay attention to that on the very top of page 589. And I wanted you to pay attention to pages 591 and 592, but particularly pay attention on 592. Very sentence length, but seek an average length of 15 to 20 words. What you want to do is use a more compact style of writing in this technical communication class, and you want to break up your sentences more. It gives better clarity for the writing. And the same thing with your paragraphs. When you write an email, especially, you don't want your paragraphs to go beyond 5 to 6 sentences, because if they do, sometimes that can result in confusion for the reader. The one other suggestion that they talk about here is use the active voice. So who observed what? So for example, a few years ago, I wrecked my bicycle. Michael was speeding down the hill and wrecked his bicycle. So what was Michael doing? I had a student that wrote this particular sentence in a document, and she said, over the weekend, the trusses and the roof was installed on my home. Well, did they go up there automatically? They sure did not. So she rewrote it, and she used the active voice. Over the weekend, my husband, who is a contractor, and his crew installed the roof and trusses on our home. Much clearer and much more accurate. The only time that you are going to use the passive voice is when you're doing bad news. Instead of personalizing, you want to depersonalize it. But for 95% of the applications, you are going to be using the active voice. And then the biggest suggestion too that they talk about, and I want to refer to you this I want you to read this consistently. There's a section on being concise, and as far as reducing wordy phrases, in particular On page 594, they use some of them, but the most common one is due to the fact that you can change it as because or since. And so they give other suggestions as far as making your writing a little bit tighter. Be accurate in wording. And so they go through that on the next few pages. But on page 598, what I just talked about was using the active voice. And so they explain the difference between those. And I just wanted you to be aware of. 603 talks about plain English and simplified English. Take a look at that because they have that on 603 and they also have it on page 604. When you go a little bit further back in this chapter, they have a couple of some exercises, and sometimes when I teach this class in class, I'll use that. And then on 613, they have a little handbook. There's not that much to it, but it does have you know, some useful information there. So they have a couple appendixes there, and I wanted to make you aware of that. And of course, at the very end, they have an index. And if you notice in the next to the last page, there are standard abbreviations used for making corrections on drafts. And so if you have a professor or an editor, a colleague or so on that they use those you can know what they mean. And then the last page at the very end is a planning form to use when you draft up some of your documents for this class or for other classes that you have. I'm going to show you a couple of books, and a few of these you may have. And one of the ones I really like is if you took college writing at WCCC, you will have this brief Penguin handbook with exercises. This happens to be the 4th edition, which is a new edition. But if you have any of the other editions, you know, that they're fine. Keep one of these handbooks available near your desk. I can't stress to you how helpful a handbook is and how much useful information it gives. But, you know, for this particular class, you know, the typical information is obviously helpful. But there's a tab in here, tab number 4, that I'm looking at, and that tab is on designing and presenting, and it talks about using visuals effectively in your writing. That's useful. That's very, very useful for this particular class. And so if you have this handbook, you know, keep it. And if you don't, you can always pick up a used copy very cheaply at Amazon.com or half.com. Now, a few years ago in this particular class, we used to use this book, which is actually pretty much the same as a Brief Penguin Handbook, but more focused on professional writing. It's called the Prentice Hall Reference Guide for Professional Writing. And it has a few different tabs in it that are not in the Brief Penguin Handbook, but it does have public and professional writing, which is useful. And then they have a particular section like on style and word choice. So they focus a little bit more on style in business writing. And remember, again, style is the way that you express your sentences, the length of your sentences, how you set up your paragraphs. And also, too, obviously for this class, we're concerned about format. Format would be your headings, you know, your use of white space, bullets, in-text emphasis, which would be bold or underline, the size of font you use, the types of fonts you use. You know, you can use a fancier font, you can use a plain font. There's a lot of different choices. But this class doesn't really teach you anything different that you don't know. It teaches you to use it in combination with other types of techniques you've learned in college writing and other classes. Now, one other book that I wanted to make you aware of, there is a book that all people in office administration here at WCCC use, and it's called HOW. It's the Handbook for Office Workers, and you can look that up at Amazon or you can look that up in other places, but that's a handbook that's used for people that are office managers or administrative assistants and so on. My dad used to be the president of a insurance company, and one time he had to write a letter of censure for an employee, which means that the person did something that violated company policy, and so he had to explain what the violation was and what the penalty would be for future violations. And so we use this handbook for office workers. If you use the owl.english.purdue.edu and you type, when you get into that, you type business writing or if you type tone in business writing, they have a lot of good information there. And obviously that is helpful as far as for writing clearer sentences, but also too for writing clearer, more accurate writing in business and also technical writing, which are basically interchangeable terms. But I just wanted to refer you to that, and I find that particular place to be helpful. Now, if you go to www.bartleby.com, that's one of the best websites that I've used as far as for reference. They have one there called the Strunk and White Elements of Style, and it's a brief little handbook, and it talks to you about editing or tightening your sentence level writing, and it's very useful. They also have like famous quotations. They have Gray's Anatomy. They have medical information and so on. I have like refdesk.com. That's one of my favorite sites, that I use a lot, and also through the WCCC website. When you go to the library tab at the portal, they have some really useful, helpful websites that they recommend. But of course, through our WCCC library site, you have access to EBSCOhost, through LexisNexis, which is a really very good one, EncyclopediaBritannica.com. You have A Matter of Fact. You have Opposing Viewpoints. You have a number of different databases that are really quite good, so I wanted to make you aware of that. I have a book also, too, that I sometimes use. And if you write for a newspaper, newspapers follow this, the Associated Press style book, which tells you, how you should set up columns in a newspaper, how to indent certain columns, how to write certain sentences, how you use capitalization for certain words, and things of that nature. If you do an internet search and if you type NASA style guide, the style guide for the National Space Aeronautical Association, or I'm drawing a blank for NASA, but the space organization that we have here in the United States, they have a recommended style for documents and so on that they want their writers and editors and so on to follow. And so that they use that consistently. And so that's important. So if you are, obviously for this class, you want to try to use a handbook, or try to, if you don't have the handbook, refer to the textbook. Now, if you do have access, if you bought a new edition of the book and you had the card that went with your book, you can register to use My Tech Com Lab. And with the My Tech Com Lab, you have access to a handbook there. You also have access to an electronic version of our textbook, which is useful. I wanted to give you one other example here that you might find useful. I'm going to hold up this book. A couple years ago, this lady, Kathleen McWhorter, is the main author, and then I work with her. I was one of the other people that did it, and these two other authors is Mary Applegate and Rebecca Frazier. We all wrote this Instructor's Resource Guide for Successful College Writing, and it's a book that we use now for college writing. But if you ever teach at the college level, something that you'll see is these instructors' manuals sometimes aren't the best, but this one was very, very good. And so we developed about 10 different chapters as far as how to teach using this book, and also how to teach writing effectively. But we had to follow common style. So we had to make sure everybody was using the same headings, the subheadings, the common terms. Like we couldn't use the word semester, we used the word term. We use, instead of using different terms for the papers, we use first draft, second draft, final draft. And so we had to use consistent language. A lot of companies will have style guides for you to follow. However, if you're working on a project with a group of people, you're going to have to develop a style guide. And some of the style guidelines you can refer to are pretty much in Chapter 3, but more so in Chapter 4, as far as like, how you're going to lay out the page, what types of headings you're going to be using, what your paragraph length is, and so on. So that applies to style. My limit with these YouTube videos is 15 minutes, and I'm almost there. So I just installed this webcam today at my office. I just wanted to try it out, and it seems to work pretty well. Okay, thank you.